if you'd like to, you can keep your videos off and your microphones on mute, just so there's no background noise. But please do use the chat. At the moment, everyone's saying hello and where they're from. That's great. Lovely to see people from far and wide, and some friendly faces and names as well. Hello to you all. So yeah, please do use the chat. At certain points, I'll ask you maybe some questions or your opinions on things, and it'd be great to get those in the chat. And I will save some time at the end for some general Q&A, but if anything comes up as we go through the session, please put it in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that, but John's going to help me as well, should we miss anything and want to come back to it at the end. Okay, so lots of people, what have we got here? There's Germany, the UK, Lebanon, Hyderabad in India, Amsterdam, Tokyo, far and wide. I'm joining from Ireland, as I said in the chat. You can see on the shared screen there, I work at IATEFL. In fact, that's my company, IATEFL, and we've been here for about 3 years. But my background, I've been teaching for 25 years now. Yeah, started in 1999, at the turn of the century. In Japan, in fact, I see we've got someone joining from Japan. And since then, anyway, I've taught in various places. I've taught in the UK, I've taught in Spain, I've taught in Italy. And a lot of the work that I do at the moment is in teacher training. It's in curriculum design and assessment, included in that, and materials writing. Okay, so that's a little bit about my context. Today's session is very much focused on teaching, and it's essentially a case study. I'm going to share my experiments when I was teaching a group, and my successes and challenges and failures using generative AI, specifically Chat GPT. Okay, and this was around about a year ago. So even now, things have, as with anything to do with tech, things do move very quickly. Let's recap the blurb. Okay, so hopefully you've seen this, and this is why we're here. But here's what I'm going to attempt to cover in the session. Let's take a look. What did I say? What have I promised? I suppose this is a reminder to me as well. What have I promised in this session? So I said, personalized, contextually relevant study and practice materials are a good thing. I'll give you some references for why this is, but I'd say it's largely uncontroversial. And the focus then of this session is, can we extend that to assessment? Okay, so it's not so much about lesson materials as assessment. And when I use the word assessment, I'm here talking about formative assessments especially. And the case study that I'm going to give you it's very much assessment for learning. Formative assessments, I might mention some aspects of summative or high stakes assessments, but essentially this is about teachers creating your own assessments for your students. So something that's really contextually relevant and based on information that you gather as teachers about what needs assessing as we go forward through a course, so we can then plan our courses in an ongoing way. Okay. And the big question, can we save time? We're all pushed for time, are we not? With the pressures of teaching and additional admin and work and so on. So if we can save time, this is obviously very attractive to us. Time that we save there, we can spend on other things, both professionally and of course in our lives. So let's see, can we? Did I manage to? That's a big question, okay? Okay, so as I said, I think this is largely uncontroversial, but this is about study and practice materials. We adapt the materials that we use with our students in order to make them most effective. Maybe you create your own materials from scratch, or maybe you're adapting a course book. Maybe you work in a context where you have very little say over the materials. I recognize that. So what you take away from the session will very much depend on how much freedom you do have in your materials creation, including test creation. Here's a few quotes from Brian Tomlinson about good study and practice material, good learning material. I said we want to have a principled approach. So these are some taken from some of Tomlinson's principles for good language learning materials. We want to expose learners to language in authentic use. So if we adapt from a one-size-fits-all kind of courseware approach If we adapt that to make sure it's relevant to our students, then they're going to be exposed to the sorts of language that in the future or currently they need, okay? We also want to provide lots of opportunities to achieve communicative purposes with our material. So not just sort of discrete items or bits of structure, but an overall communicative goal. I think as learners ourselves, I'm sure we've all learned a language, or we've learned some things, but when we're in the classroom, if the teacher or if the institution tailors materials so that it meets our interests and our needs, then we're going to be more interested. We're going to want to study more. Okay, I think that's true for your general material, and we can extend that. That's my proposal. We can extend that to assessment as well. You'll have more involvement on an intellectual level and an emotional level if the material you use in the classroom is tailored, if it is personalized, if it is something that's contextually relevant, okay? And there we go, that's from Tomlinson 2010, but in fact, you can find many different iterations of his principles. That, I think, is kind of not dreadfully controversial. I don't think a lot of people would argue with that. We might argue that we have challenges implementing that, depending on our context and then depending on how much freedom we have. But I think we can say it's a good thing. It's a good thing if we have personalized, relevant materials. So why should we then think of extending that to assessment? Can't we just take something off the shelf? You know, if it's like it's test time, can't I just take the test that we always use, or something that's commercially available or worldwide or published? Can't I do that? Well, if you do that with materials which you've adapted, there'll be a mismatch. So we're talking about alignment, okay, greater constructive alignment. And a quick definition there from Biggs, what we mean. The stuff you do in the lesson is reflected in the test. Okay, so if I've adapted material, if I've changed the syllabus, if I've listened to the students, if I've worked with a kind of emergent or negotiated syllabus, that necessarily means that the assessments have to be designed after I've done the teaching. I can't really even have it in advance too much. I need to be able to do it on the go. And this will give you, of course, greater content validity of assessments that you include in your courses. So there's the kind of, why is it's a good thing and why. The rest of the session, I'm going to show you my experiments with trying to implement this. So it's a case study approach, as I said. Here's a few details about the class that I was teaching. It's online, and there's 15 learners. It was a synchronous class, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'm just going to pause there to let that sink in. Do you think that's a lot? So it's on Zoom, 4 hours a day, a synchronous class, Monday to Friday, 4 hours. And it's 8 weeks. Okay, so it's 160 hours. This is an 160-hour course. This was online preparation before an in-person course. So this group of students, in fact, they had a scholarship, government funding, where they had an online phase, and then they were going to visit another country. I will reveal in a moment. They were going to visit and have an in-person course in an English-speaking environment, in an English-speaking environment country. So, and here's the question: where are they from, and where are they going to? Which mirrors, in fact, assessment for learning, doesn't it? We think, where are our learners? Where do they want to be? Where are they? How are they going to get there? But anyway, literally, geographically, where are they from, and where are they going to? This is your first challenge. If you have the chat box ready, I'm going to show you some of the material, in fact, some of the learner output. Let's see, on the left, you have some learner output, them talking about their country. This one is, there was a lesson, something about advice, I think. So if you go to this country, this is some advice that they have. Where are they from? That's our first question, okay? Any guesses in the chat? And don't worry, I won't, shame anybody. I don't think I would know. Before I taught this group, I wouldn't know. Okay, so we've got a few offers in the chat. I'm going to read these out for the benefit of the recording. So we've got Brazil so far. You're not far off. You're in the right kind of, oh, we're getting closer. We've got Colombia, a bit warmer, or colder with Peru. Okay, and colder again. Up a bit higher, up a bit higher. Colombia is the closest so far. In fact, has a border with this country. Well done. Okay, we've got the answer. Someone's come in with Panama there. A couple with Panama. Lovely stuff. Well done. An award to Lucy there for guessing correctly. So yeah, they're from Panama. And a yes or no in the chat. Again, has anyone visited Panama? Does anyone have good knowledge of Panama? Yes or no in the chat? Personally, I haven't. I've learned a lot more about it, of course. I had 160 hours. And in fact, I had 2 courses, one year after another. So I didn't know a lot about it, which actually presented a great communicative opportunity for the learners. You know, they could teach me a lot about it and we could work a lot with that. The next question, where are they going to? So I'm going to show you, again, some learner output. They're in Panama, they're doing my little online phase, and later they're going to visit an English-speaking country. Where exactly, in fact, maybe you can even get a city. Here are some questions they have. It's towards the end of the course. These are some questions they have about the place they're going to visit. So again, in the chat, where do you think they're going? So we've got a first guess in there. Okay, so we've got Canada, England, UK, yep. They're heading north, certainly. Okay. Right. Well, we do have so a tentative question mark on the correct answer. It is Scotland. We can't find out the city, can we? So to be precise, they're going to Edinburgh. Okay. And you can notice some of the preoccupations about the weather. The guy, it's cold, even though it's summer, which is a lovely bit of language for given their level, which was elementary beginner. And yeah, nice questions about the Queen. They're all very interested. What's this? You've got this royal family, and do they like them? You know, and other questions would arise like, okay, what is? So I know about Britain or the UK, or I thought I did. And what's this? Scotland, England? And wait a minute, Shaun, where are you? You're in Ireland. What's going on there? So there's a lot of curiosity around, you know, much in the same way as I was very ignorant of the geography, politics, and history of Panama. They also had similar curiosity about where I was teaching, and of course, where they're going to go, because they were going to go and stay in homestays and interact in Edinburgh, in fact. I mean, fantastic opportunity, really. They had this sort of 160 hours of online teaching, and then they're off for 6 months to study in Edinburgh. A few more details then about the context. Yeah, the level, as I mentioned, it's low. Okay, some were kind of absolute beginners, and they made massive progress, of course, as you do as an absolute beginner when you apply yourself. The syllabus type, this is important, I think, when we're thinking about how we create materials, and of course, how we create assessments. What works in my context is not necessarily going to work in yours. I mean, we've already mentioned contextually relevant materials. It's the same for teachers, contextually relevant teaching materials. So I had very free reign. I could pretty much do what I wanted, which is great. That's my favorite, in fact, in job assignments. So my syllabus type, it was TBL leaning. I'm not going to say it was hard TBL. There were lessons that there was pre-planned language. For example, I decided today we're going to look at this particular structure or lexis and so on. Not for every lesson, but for many of the lessons, I would have in mind what I wanted to achieve. So there were some focus tasks, some pre-planned language. It was somewhat negotiated and emergent because some of the topics that arose through conversation were then incorporated into the syllabus. And I thought, okay, tomorrow I can change that. I can do something, I'll do a reading based on what they were talking about. So it was I had a lot of freedom to respond to emerging needs of the group. Sorry, I put TBL, task-based learning. I put that on the slide. So if you're not sure what's that, it's task-based learning. So a lot of the tasks, they were given tasks. They had to produce something. I would monitor, listen, give feedback on the language. We would study the language, and then we'd do the task again, maybe with different groupings or maybe slightly different iterations or slightly tweak it. That was more or less, that was one common lesson shape, shall we say. And remember, it's a 4-hour synchronous class. There's room for a lot of variety in there as well. They all share an L1. They all speak Spanish as a first language. So they did use that a lot, and I encouraged it in certain lessons, like first write it in Spanish, now let's translate it, now let's put it on the shared GDoc, now let's correct it. So that was the kind of class, if you like. Okay, we have that fixed, and we're like, all right, how does that then translate into the assessments that we've got here? There was a course book provided, but it wasn't obligatory. I'm not going to name the course book. That's not really the focus of the session, to sort of slam, criticize a particular course book. It's more a case of, well, look, the course book had some good things in it, and I used it, by the way. You know, in 160 hours, I was very glad of a course book. In fact, maybe we could just call it a textbook, because I used the texts more than anything. I took some of the readings, or there were some nice videos, in fact. Some of the listenings, you know, I could take some of those and maybe change the task or that kind of thing. So more of a textbook than a course book. But my point is, the tests, the progress tests and so on, of course, then didn't quite match up with what we actually did in the class. What did we actually do? Let's have a look at that. Your next task. Okay, so in the chat, it's left or right. Okay, I'm going to make it clear. Which one, left or right? Which one is the course book? Okay, that's the question. Which one is the course book? This is a list of topics. Left or right? I'll give you some time and take the opportunity to have a little. Oh, we've got some consensus. Okay, okay. Let me get my laser pointer. You're absolutely right. It is the right. This one's the course book. Okay. I'm not saying these are bad topics. I think a lot of these are good. And in fact, a lot of them are exactly, you know, talk about your family, talk about your hobbies. A lot of them are exactly what we did in the class and exactly what they wanted to talk about. You'll notice maybe that some of them, so for example, London is less relevant for them. They're not going to London. They're going to Edinburgh. They live in Panama. Why don't we describe our own area? And that was one topic that emerged. Other things that you might find surprising on the left. So this is after the event, a sort of post hoc kind of list of topics, if you like, an emerging syllabus. It's like, okay, fine, family, hobbies, filmmaking. Why is that there? Well, a couple of the people in the group did make films. One of them was making documentary films. So for that reason, that became a topic. Also, the act of making videos, they all had mobile phones with, you know, video capabilities. They made a lot of videos for the class. It was one of the key homework tasks was to record something and then describe it and share it on a shared drive. So some of these, you might think, okay, why did that come up? Social inequality, you're unlikely to find in a global course book, simply because it doesn't, not because of the market. They're too controversial. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah. Colonialism, likewise, especially in a beginner textbook. But they wanted to talk about it. They were teaching me about the history of Panama, and colonialism is a big part of that. They were also asking questions about Ireland. Colonialism is a big part of the history of Ireland. You'll notice St. Patrick's Day, it was around March. So simple day-to-day things like, what are you doing? What's happening there? What's happening here? These sort of things fed into the topics. And then they could, of course, do a variety of things like describing national days and so on. The Acts of Union, sorry, this probably needs explanation. This is a specific legal act that joined the kingdoms of England and Scotland historically. I noticed somebody joined from Scotland, and perhaps I'll get you on the microphone to explain better than me. I'm not going to go into the history of it. I'd run the risk of not doing it justice. But this happened to come up. You know, they were very interested in the history of the place they were going to. And as we'll see, in fact, there was a link to Panama there with that one. I'll come back to that. So yeah, you're quite right. The one on the right was the course book, and the one on the left was what actually happened. Okay. So onto the assessments. reading. Okay, I'm going to talk about how I created assessments for reading, how I created assessment for listening, and more traditional, shall we say, assessment of grammar and vocabulary. So that's what I'll show you next, okay? Where are we? Reading. So like I said, a lot of the content they've done on the course was output. You know, they had to write things. They had to translate things from Spanish into English. They had to make a video and describe it. They had to share lots of things about their area and ask questions. There's a lot of communicative tasks which rely on students producing language. And there was a certain point in the course where I was thinking, well, we haven't really used a lot of texts. We haven't done a lot of reading. What kind of text can I bring into the classroom to assess how they get on with longer texts? Okay, and as we started at the beginning, my philosophy was this needs to be something that's contextually relevant and personalized so that they're interested in reading, so that they have a clear reason. So it's at the stage of the course where I want to do some formative assessment. Prior to this point, we had discussion of colonialism in Panama. I then went away and did some research. There's also discussion of immigration across the Darien Gap. You can Google this and find out about the Darien Gap, but if not, here's an old map showing it's a land bridge between Colombia and Panama. And historically and currently is a very important route from the south to North America. Okay, and a lot of people make a very dangerous crossing to go across the Darien Gap in order to move from one country to another. They've been telling me about this. Okay. So, some teacher research reveals an interesting convergence of Panamanian and Scottish history. Teacher research, that's me, the teacher, and teacher research is me looking on Wikipedia, okay? So there was no, if we're thinking, what kind of research? That's interesting. No, I went and read about it. They told me about something, I went away and I read about it on Wikipedia. And it's like, and for me, it was interesting because I didn't know about this. And, you know, I'm talking to these guys from Panama and it related to things we were saying. And it was like there was a link between Scottish history and Panamanian history. And I thought, great, let's start as a prompt. Let's use that as a prompt for Chat GPT. Wikipedia article was far too long, far too difficult. I can't use that. Let's see if I can make a short text that I can use, maybe some comprehension questions about the Darien Gap and Panamanian and Scottish history. Let's find out what that link is as we go through, okay? Here's my prompt. So as you can see, my research revealed that in the Darien Gap, there was once an attempt from Scotland to colonize Panama, to set up a little colony. This was very interesting and later proved very interesting for the students. They didn't know this. One comment from the student was, even Scotland, or also Scotland, has, you know, because they had a long list of different countries that had colonized Panama. And they said, even Scotland, look, who would think it, who knew it? So it's an interesting area for discussion, and it aligns very much with the sort of topics that they wanted to talk about. And they brought to the class themselves. This is not the teacher bringing this to the students to discuss. It's more something that's emerged from the syllabus. So here's what Chat GPT came up with. And there are some problems for me. Okay, this is the first attempt. And I looked at it and thought there are some problems. I'll give you some time to read it yourself, and then we'll think about what problems there are. In fact, in the chat, if you'd like, you can write what some of the problems could be. Thank you very much. We've got some suggestions in the chat. Right, vocabulary is a problem. Mm-hmm. language not graded. Oh. Okay. The main focus on the vocab. Was the prompt asking for A1? Well, no, we'll come to that. And level is a key challenge. And if you've ever tried, you'll know. One thing to bear in mind here is the students themselves are from Panama and they're going to Scotland, and they've talked a lot about this. Okay, they have talked about colonization. Okay, they've talked about colonies. So when we think about vocabulary, it's true we can find a sort of general, that's not A1, that's not A2, that's not B1 or B2, but we know ourselves. These students, we know their first language, so that will help. We could think of these Latinate cognates, some of these words with these students, with my students. If your students have a different L1, you'll also know if they have cognates as well. Thank you very much, Kate. Yes, I'm going to come to that as well. There's an interesting comment in the chat which has preempted something. It's too focused on Scotland's concerns and not enough on those faced by the indigenous population. Absolutely. Bias and stance is a key thing to guard against. But to start with, there's a few issues. Okay, first of all, it's a bit short. I want something a bit longer. I can't really come up with a lot with such a short text if I'm trying to write some assessment items. So it's too short. The questions are actually too easy. If you try and do it, it's like, where did it attempt to establish a colony? And in the text, Scotland attempted to establish a colony in Panama. So simple word matching, it's not going to tell me anything about students' reading ability, okay? Also, it doesn't have what I really wanted. I found out, oh, look, the Darien Gap that the students were telling me about, that's actually key in something that happened with a particular person. And I wanted a bit of spin-off. You know, I wanted this to feed forward, not just to be the end. This is a formative assessment. And we can also, once we've done a bit of testing, we can also talk about the content. So it didn't have what I wanted there for follow-up discussion. So I tried again. Let's have a look at how I tried. I said, do the same, but double the length and include some specific names. You notice I'm typing quickly and full of spelling errors, but Chat GPT doesn't mind. And the key thing I wanted to show how this led to the Acts of Union. They'd asked about the Acts of Union, you might remember. So how Scotland and England were legally joined. And it was because of the disastrous attempt, or one of the key factors, excuse me, one of the key factors was money. They lost a lot of money in Scotland, and so they went to, or a lot of people looked for stronger ties with England. And a lot of people disagreed with that, okay? So anyway, I'm trying to get some of this information into the text, and I want it to be a bit longer. Let's see how we got on. It then doubled it, and it then made it far too long. So I got into a sort of conversation or battle. So, okay, great. Now try half. And then clearly it wasn't half. He said, oh, that's 68 words. So, of course, I learned a lesson. I need to be more specific. Yeah, I can't be saying, all right, double it, make it longer, make it shorter. I'm not talking to a person. I need to be very, very specific in my prompts. It's like, okay, do it again, but include the location Darien. Do it again, and I tried. You can't blame me for trying. I've learnt my lesson. Now grade the language in the text for CEFR A1 level. It was not able to do this, okay? Here's where I got to with my prompt. It's sort of refining my prompt. 150 words. I asked it, I pleaded with it to make it A1 level. I also wanted the questions, and I wanted it to show the Acts of Union, and I wanted some place names because they know these places and it could lead to discussion and also potential for writing some reading items where they had to discriminate between place names, okay? It did okay, but one other thing to mention, and as Kate has put in the chat, it was still too focused on Scotland. It wasn't focused enough. It didn't mention, in fact, it mentioned the place, but it said nothing about the Panamanian people. It mentioned all the Scottish people who are involved. It said nothing about the local population. So I then had to come in again and say, please mention this. Also, it finished with a sort of concluding line of, this led to the Acts of Union, and what a wonderful place the British Empire is in all its variety. And again, it was like, well, that's not going to wash well with students who've already been discussing aspects of colonialism and their experience as a country. So you can almost see my tone in here as well. Good point in the chat as well. These all here are Chat GPT 3.5, and Christopher, thanks for contributing. Since then, we have better versions of Chat GPT, and it allows better discrimination to CEFR level if you instruct it well. That's really important. And I'll show you what happened with this particular one. I ran it through a third-party software. There are various ones, you know, paid and unpaid, that you can get hold of. And it came up with B2 as the level. So you can use a third-party tool as well. You can still rewrite and edit to simplify structure and lexis. And as I mentioned before, some tools will say, look, this group, you know, this word is very high level, but you might know, well, I know they know this word because I'm the teacher. Okay, I'm not designing an assessment in this instance for everybody globally. I'm designing it for my learners. So I know that, for example, certain words are very similar in their first language because I know what their first language is. Or I know that this is a word they're very familiar with because they've been talking about it for 1 week. An important final point is the human element. I think this is emphasized in everything generative AI at the moment, isn't it? Hooray, we still require humans. But one of the key things we need to do is to check carefully the output that we get from Chat GPT and other generative AI. Compare it against your knowledge of the group that you are writing for, and indeed check for stance, check for bias, and so on. So lessons learned, be really precise. If you want something specific inserted, tell it. Give it the actual word you want. Tell it the place name. And stance, position. It tends towards, because it's sort of an average of everything, it tends towards quite average text generation. It tends towards cliche, quite predictable moral judgments, ethical judgments, nothing really to provoke strong responses, strong emotional responses. And representation and bias is important. So that was lessons learned from generating reading text, and a lot of that can apply to text for study as well as it can do for assessment. How about listening? Okay, how about using AI for checking listening? Again, I'll give you a bit more on the context. What had happened in the course so far? They had made, as I said, videos about their own area. They'd done some translation work, you know, describing their area and then putting it into English. They compared with each other and talked about different parts of Panama, different parts of the city, if they were in the city. Some were out in the countryside more. Another task they'd done is they'd watched a walk video. You can find a few of these online of silent, essentially, no narration, rather. You can hear the sounds, but people walking through cities. So they were going to Edinburgh, so this is quite handy. There's a lot of these. And I sort of ascribed certain sections that they had to watch in groups and then describe what they saw, you know, the things they could see around them. Of course, they're very curious because this is the place they're going to, but also it affords lots of opportunities for language output, lots of vocabulary, of course, and structure as well. You know, what's going on, what can they see? They would have feedback from the teacher. I should emphasize, not in this instance, I'm not talking about feedback, ChatGPT being used for feedback on student work. And we reach a point where it's like, okay, now it's time to, again, do some formative assessment. At this occasion, I was thinking about listening assessment, okay, on this occasion. So at this point of the course, let's do some listening assessment. They have heard a lot of my voice, not lots of other people's voices. So I needed to get something to test their ability on this. I haven't found great success using generative AI to produce listening text. It's not something I think it is good at. So I went to find some authentic listening from people. And I then use some Chat GPT tools to help me create assessments from it. Not just Chat GPT, but other AI tools as well. Let me play you a recording. You can listen and think, what tasks should we have? Could you use this recording with any of your students?
Small town in a region of Scotland called Argyll and Bute. About 10,000 people live in this town, but despite it being quite small, it has quite a lot of good amenities. It has big supermarkets, it has lots of lovely independent shops, restaurants, bakers, coffee shops, so lots of nice things. Even has a museum, a submarine museum, and an independent cinema, which is located in an old converted church, so it's very atmospheric. It's also surrounded by countryside and is on the banks of a loch, which is a lake, so there's lots of things I can do in the countryside as well. But I usually spend time in town once a week on a Saturday morning. I like to go in and do some shopping for the weekend, go to the local butcher and the supermarket and things, and that's about enough for the week.
Okay. We've got one vote for I could use it. Great. Okay, so that's just the text. All right, we haven't got a task or an activity for it yet. You could use it as study and practice, or you could use it in assessment, and that's what I used it for. You can see the transcript there. By the way, the transcript was generated with artificial intelligence through an app called otter.ai. I'll show you that on the next slide. So one thing that AI is good at is generating transcripts. Okay, and this is actually very accurate. I didn't need to change very much on this. Occasionally, AI transcripts can clean up a bit too much authentic text. They might remove things like hesitation devices like they might try to correct a bit too much in essence. So sometimes you have to put that messiness back in to a transcript. The audio is not AI generated. This is a real person. You might know this person actually. Does anyone know the person? It says Gemma at the top. This is Gemma Archer, who is very active in Pronsig, has a book out at the moment with Robin Walker, Pronunciation for a Global World. It's excellent. Highly recommend it. Go and check it out, or go and Google Gemma Archer, Robin Walker, Pronunciation for a Global World. No, this was crowdsourced, shall we say. You might notice on the left, this is from a WhatsApp group, which you're welcome to join, actually. There's a group called TD Lab Staffroom. There's a Facebook group and there's a WhatsApp group. I can dig out the links towards the end, if you like. And it's just a way of crowdsourcing authentic speech. So this is me. I've written this. And you'll notice this is a couple of years ago now that I got this audio. Hi, everyone. Request for a short audio about your area. And lots of people came back. And one of them was Gemma. Thank you very much to Gemma for letting me share that. And then I can use that in class. Okay. Here's the process. Okay, here's what I did. So I took the human audio and fed it into a transcription tool. I then fed that transcript into Chat GPT, and my plan was to make some assessment materials. I thought, okay, I could make a summary. Chat GPT is quite good at summarizing things, but maybe I can insert some false information, and then the listener students can check, see if they can spot the false information. I thought maybe as well I could have a list of the main points for oral reporting, okay, which could be another way of assessing listening. How many of the main points have they understood? And they could write this down also, or they can orally report them. Various things you can do, of course, when creating test items. And I was thinking, right, maybe I'll make some multiple choice items. Maybe I'll do a bit of true or false. Maybe I'll have some open questions, or maybe something else. Let's check how it got on writing summaries. Once again, what's the problem with this summary? This is a summary actually not from Chat GPT, but from a different AI tool, from Otter. I think you can notice a key problem, first of all, here. So Otter, in this case, has no idea And we said before, be careful of bias, which just assumes it's a man. And it takes a very common name as well. John, you're moderating. No offense at all to the name John. And my own name, of course, Shaun is the same as John and is a very common name. But the point is, yeah, you can't rely on these things without checking and say, what's going on there? Why has it come up with that? Who's John? This was from Gemma. So you have to tell, for example, Chat GPT the name. Chat GPT at least came up with the speaker. But level is again a problem, okay, without being told. They're told to make a summary, but look, despite its size, the town offers various amenities. It's a bit too high level, isn't it? Once again, vocab is an issue. So what did I do? I asked it, now add a summary, but have 3 factual mistakes in the summary. You'll notice that the mistakes it came up with are quite obvious. So look, there's a castle instead of a museum. A submarine, what is it? A space shuttle exhibit instead of a submarine museum. So problematic. It couldn't really do it. It couldn't do the creative stuff. So I sort of thought, well, I could try it myself, perhaps. I tried my best to get Chat GPT to do what I want it to do. But as you can see, it didn't. Okay. It just came up with something rather absurd. So this is where I was at. So, well, maybe I'll just write my own. And indeed, that's what I did. Or you could do something else. Now, what I would say is that Chat GPT and other tools are very good at making transcripts and summarizing, giving bullet points. So I just said, list the key points the speaker makes as bullets. This you can use in a form of assessment, which is often called text mapping. You can use it for reading, but you can use it for listening as well. There's a great book by Rita Green I've referenced at the bottom, Designing Listening Tests. If you are wanting, for example, to use authentic texts in a listening assessment program, it's a very handy book, and it references this one practice of text mapping, where you can get other human listeners to listen to a text and write down the main points. But now, of course, with something that's good at summarizing, you can give a transcript to AI and try to get it to make a list of key points. Don't rely on it 100%, but it will speed things up, okay? How do I then use that in an assessment? Well, you can play the recording and say, please list the main points. If you have a small class, or if you're doing one-to-one assessment, you can do that orally. And in fact, that's an approach that's taken by one mainstream exam board, Trinity College London, in their ISE tests, do exactly this. It's a one-to-one test. And there's a speaking and listening test where an audio is played, and then there is oral reporting by the candidate of what they've understood, having made notes. That, of course, can be quite time-consuming if you have a big class. So what you can do instead is have some sort of shared document where you can monitor in real time to see how many of the main points they've recorded. If you have a list here, we've got 6 main points and the candidate records 3, you've even got a numerical score in terms of how many of the main points, 3 out of 6, it's 50% of the main content they've understood. Another thing you can do with a transcript is to think, an informative assessment is to think about what are the key problems. Here's a quick diagram of how assessment for learning might work. You have a goal set, you diagnose the problems in achieving that goal. You would then in the class have teaching techniques to follow that up. And again, it becomes a circular system. So in this case, my students want to, and I've also selected as a goal, I want them to understand authentic speech. Not just my voice, but when they go to Scotland, when they're speaking to people, they're quite anxious that, okay, am I going to be able to understand people? So for that reason, I want to source some authentic speech. In this case, I was lucky, for example, to get people who were also in Scotland, not necessarily Edinburgh, Argyll and Buttes on the other side, but people who would be, it wouldn't be unusual to find this variety of English and this pronunciation where they were going to stay. And then I can diagnose the issues. Now, you won't be surprised if you have some knowledge of listening processes and listening difficulties, that the biggest difficulty up until B2 level, as John Field has pointed out, is decoding. Simply matching the oral input the signal that they hear, matching that to words that they know, is extremely difficult. And one of the best ways, or quickest, easiest ways I find to deal with that is simply a gap fill or a dictation. So you could play an audio, pause it, and ask the learners, write down the last 3 words, the last 4 words you heard. Okay. And that's exactly what I did with Gemma's recording as well. You know, I could delete certain words and say, listen and complete. Okay, what's the missing word? Okay, and that would test and assess where they're at with decoding. I could show them that that was a problem, and then we could do other work in class. For example, quick dictations from the teacher, other audios where we would pause and write down what they think they heard and compare it. So that fed into a whole cycle of assessment for learning with listening. So far then, we've looked at reading and listening. Here are some of the learning points for me from that process. So far I've looked, as I said, at using sort of whole text, reading, listening, and so on. I haven't done anything on discrete item. Maybe that's to do with my views on language learning as well, but I need to bear in mind the first thing that's going to happen with this group of students, the first thing when they go into college, when they're there in Edinburgh, is they'll be given a level test. Will that level test feature a lot of listening to authentic recordings or reading about contextually relevant items? No, it won't. It'll be a multiple choice test. It'll be something that's practical, easy to deliver, and will quickly put them in the right level. So it would be remiss of me, the teacher, not to prepare them in some way. And I thought, well, let's see if we can at least personalize the multiple choice tests, the language, the grammar, the vocabulary tests. Let's see if we can do that using Chat GPT to save time, you know, and to have that constructive alignment. Okay, a quick summary from the previous part, and then we'll have a look at the other test types. Okay. Here's my prompt. Okay, I asked, please make a progress test for A2 learners. They progressed very fast. 10 questions, multiple choice. I wanted to test some of the things that, of course, we studied in the course. So, for example, they talked about futures we'd be going to. They hadn't looked at will, so I've learned to be specific. Don't use will. And also the function. So talk about future plans or predictions. I didn't distinguish. Also, they'd studied simple present and they'd studied present perfect. So I wanted some sort of contrast, which ones. Here's an example. And once again, any problems? Let's take a look. And in the chat, if you'd like, any problems with what it produced? Let's have a look at question number 2. Let's try and do the test. All right, just for number 2, for the sake of argument, question number 2, what's the answer? Exactly. I think it could be all 3, to be honest, depending on the context. Yeah, it could be any of those. I mean, that's not a problem just with Chat GPT, to be fair. You'll find plenty of tests where that is the problem. And more than one answer could be possible. So it requires careful checking afterwards and editing. Here's another example. What's nice about this, I think, is it's contextually relevant. So we have a student from Panama who moved to Scotland to study English. This is their context. Okay, you're not going to get that in the end of unit test in the coursebook because it won't be designed for them. You'll notice again, you might think, hang on, this is language way above the level. However, it's language that happened to emerge in the syllabus as we were going on. So you can have some advantages to feeding in names, places, and so on when making some tests like these. Quick summary though. ChatGPT was inconsistent as a multiple choice item writer. As I said, multiple options were sometimes possible. Requires a check for bias as well. Chat GPT didn't have intimate knowledge of, the lives and experiences of people from Panama, and it would make assumptions taken from what it can find online. And it would still require a bit of checking and prompting to personalize the content. Okay. We're nearing the end, and I did want to save time for questions, so I just want to go back to what we said we'd look at. That contextually relevant, personalized materials are a good thing. We wanted to see, can we extend that to assessment, and can we save time, but maintain a principled approach? So I think the first one, I think, is uncontroversial. That's my point of view. We can extend that to assessment. It can be a useful tool, but not the be-all and end-all. And the principled approach thing, I think, is key. You can save time, yes, in certain areas. You can save time creating texts. You can save time making summaries. These are two things that ChatGPT is good at. But you'll end up using more time guarding against what it doesn't do well. And we've seen a few examples of that. For example, checking for level, checking for bias, checking that the items you want are included, and various other aspects as well. Okay. Overall, did I save time using it? I think I did. Will I continue to use it? Yes, I will. I just learned some things to be careful of when using it. Okay. That means we've got just under 10 minutes. I was hoping for 10, but just under 10 minutes for any questions. Thank you very much for listening and attending. I haven't managed to keep up, I think, with all of the questions in the chat, so I'm just going to scroll up, and I don't know, maybe John, you might have noted some that are missing there, but please do, yeah. Any questions you have in the chat there. Sharing the slides, yes, I certainly can. Will I do this via IATEFL? I'm not sure, John. Do you know anything about slide sharing?
You can do, Shaun.
Yeah.
If you're prepared to do that, then
Yeah.
if you can send me the link, then I'll make sure that we build that in with the recording.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can put a PDF up in there.
Thank you, Shaun. Any other questions for Shaun? There were lots of comments which were related to the talk as we were going along. But if there's anything any of the participants would like to pull out and ask, other than me celebrating the fact that apparently I sound like Gemma, who knew?
Yeah.
Then please drop it in the chat now.
I noticed one about listening. Christopher has put in about struggling to find contextually relevant audio. Yeah, I do. How can we best use AI to source or even create bespoke listening material? I have a personal stance on this, in that AI isn't good at creating spoken text at the moment. Okay, that's my view. It doesn't know about spoken discourse and what features of spoken discourse are authentic spoken discourse. So my preference is to source actual people. And I'd started off doing this years ago, just asking people with a dictaphone, pre-mobile phone days, and sort of shoving it in people's faces and asking them to give me a very short piece of audio, anything from what did you have for breakfast to what are your plans for the weekend. And I've extended that to online, and lots of other people have. It's not an amazing idea, but simply going on to an online teaching group and asking people, can you send an audio? It's very quick. Then at that stage, that's where I would use AI to make a transcript and to make a summary list that I can then work with in creation of materials. But so far, I haven't. Maybe other people have had success using AI for listening. I know that you can. I know that you can feed, for example, transcripts to certain sites and they will produce an audio. It will depend very much on how good your transcript is, so that you don't get written English being read aloud by a computer voice, and the voices are pretty good, they're getting better, but it's dependent on transcript. Spoken English is not the same as written English. So I find it easier to start with the authentic and then turn that into a written text and say, look what's happening. It's not full sentences, there's hesitation devices, there's false starts, there's all sorts of things that can cause students issues. That's my point of view on listening and AI. And there's a few suggestions as well in the chat. People are sharing lots of things. Yeah, I've heard some of these, 11 labs, natural readers, check them out, have an experiment, see how you guys get on. It's not something I've had any success with. TD, oh, okay. There's a question about TD Lab staff room. Yes, I should have the links ready to hand, shouldn't I, to paste in the chat, but I haven't. Maybe I'll put that on the slides that will then be shared with the presentation. Very simply, TD Lab was a blog that I started ages ago and no longer keep up. But the staff room was an idea of let's share some audio recordings. It started off as a Facebook group. Some activity in it from time to time, largely when I need something. And then a colleague of mine, Dan, started up a WhatsApp group as well, where people would come in, they'd join and they just ask, please, can anyone send me, 30 seconds maximum on your favorite TV show or something you hate doing or whatever they happen to be doing with their courses, and they needed to get a bit of audio. Instead of trying to trawl through YouTube and find the perfect video, they would simply ask. And I think that's a great way of sourcing authentic recordings. But yeah, so I just set up, there's a couple of groups. I'll find the links and I'll share those. If you don't manage to find it through a Google, you won't obviously find the WhatsApp one. You might be able to find the Facebook group off your own back, just doing a Google for TD Lab staff room and put in a request to join, and then you can start asking for audio. Okay. Thanks, Jess. Thanks very much, Jessica McKay to the rescue. There you go. There's a link to the Facebook group.
Super. Well, thank you so much, Shaun. I think I found it fascinating, and I think you seem to have done quite a lot of experimentation already and shortcuts for a lot of us to see what works well and the drawbacks and the challenges that are still there with using and embracing AI for assessment. So thank you very